dimensional levels between the third and the fourth dimension. It exposed human beings to a level of consciousness and awareness that we're not prepared for. And it allowed beings from other levels of existence to come in here that went into other people at that time. And it was painful, and it ended up being a disaster on the biggest level you can imagine. And so for the last, at least the last couple hundred years of Atlantis, they were in pain. It was terrible. Everybody was sick, and they were dying. This group of very high-level beings, they decided that they had to do something, and they went into a connection with our own galaxy and got permission to do something that is very rare. Since we had already reached this high level of consciousness, we had obtained it naturally, they decided, or got permission, to be able to do something to help us to get back to that level of consciousness. Now, normally that's illegal. You can't, throughout the universe, you can't interfere with other forms of consciousness. You have to leave them alone and let them naturally do whatever they're going to do. But because we had reached this level, we got permission to do something very unusual. And it's going to take me a while to explain it to you, because this is outside of our normal way of thinking. So there were three men that became paramount in this whole story. They were the ones out of this small group of highly intelligent beings who knew that we were going to fall, knew that we were going to drop in consciousness, and they were the ones that engineered, conceived of a plan or an idea of how to bring this back to us. Their names, one of them was Chikutet Arlich Vomalites, the other one was Ra, the other one was Ararat. And these three men were ascended masters. They no longer died any longer. They had figured that one out a long time ago. And they were also a part of the ascended masters of that same group that people refer to today. But they're older ones. They were ones that have been around for a very long time. And what they decided to do was something that is tried throughout the universe occasionally. It doesn't always work. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. And when it doesn't work, it's just the race of beings on that planet have to just start all over again. And that is usually hundreds of thousands of years of evolution have to be done all over again. And so they began this process of returning our consciousness to us by building a building. And they built this building in an area relative to Atlantis at that time that was completely uninhabited, out in the middle of nowhere by most people's standards. They chose this place for a very specific reason, which I'll talk about in a little while later, but it is the place that we now call Egypt. And this building that I'm referring to is the Great Pyramid in Egypt. This was, they built this before the sinking of Atlantis. They had to get it in place first, because this building was more than just a building. It was also the marking for the entire system that we're about to talk about. But according to them, it was built through consciousness, and it was built very, very rapidly in a matter, really, of hours. And it was built, even more crazy, it was built from the top down. From the top stones down to the bottom. When I presented this information to the Egyptian government back in the 90s, they thought I was crazy too. And so, but they went and checked it to see, and they checked the mortar in between the stones from the top to the bottom, and found out that the oldest stones were on the top and the youngest ones were on the bottom. They couldn't explain it, they didn't know what to say about it, but they couldn't contradict what I was saying. Now, to understand this a little bit further, it wasn't just from this one building that they were going to bring back our consciousness, or from the Great Pyramid. That was just the beginning. It was actually a web of pyramids and temples and sacred sites, churches, all kinds of buildings, even mosques, everything, along with specific mountains and lakes and rivers that were attuned to this. It was a web of these buildings all over the world. 83,000 of them, all over the whole world, were to be built over time. And in doing that, they were going to change the way the earth functions. These buildings, what's so interesting about them is that they were built over 13,000 years, but the entire structure was created in a matter of hours. Not on this dimension, but on the fourth dimension, on the higher frequencies of the Earth's consciousness. They built the entire thing, and they did that through consciousness in the same way they built the first one from the top down. And so once all these buildings were created on that other level, they slowly began to pull them out of the fourth dimension onto the third dimension. And these buildings were built by normal means. They were built by different tribes like the Mayans in the Yucatan, or in China, or in Japan. Japan has over 100 pyramids running down their islands. All over the world, in Tibet and in Mongolia. Mongolia has some of the most amazing pyramids on Earth, and hardly anyone even knows about this stuff. But they're all over. And this was the beginning of something, of an ancient science that we know a little bit about now. It's a science called geomancy. What were they doing by building these pyramids and temples and all these structures all over the world? What were they doing by doing this? Well, it was a very deep level of what today, in modern times, they call geomancy. And what is geomancy? Geomancy is a modern term, more or less. I'm sure they had another name for it, but it is what it is using stones, rocks, crystals. In modern times they use brass, wires, different kinds of physical things to change the energy flow of the earth. And these buildings, when they're placed on very, very specific, precise places on the earth, they change the internal flow inside the earth and the external flow above the earth. And I'm talking about the way these kind of energies are energies that are created by volcanoes, by tectonic plate pressures, by geopath lines, and all kinds of internal structures. You can, by moving certain stones, massive stones like a Great Pyramid, when you build certain things in very precise places, it changes the way those energies flow. And they also change the way the energies flow above the earth. And what they were doing by doing this in this way was to create a new consciousness grid. The grid that we lost in Atlantis by falling in that, literally the same fall that the Bible was talking about, by falling from a higher level of consciousness down to where we are now. They were changing this, influencing it, and creating a brand new one so that we could get back. Without this grid, without the consciousness grid, which we haven't talked about yet or really explained, but without this grid that surrounds the entire earth, we cannot get to this new or old level of consciousness. We can't return to where we once were. It's impossible. You have to have that. And so all of these millions of people that had to carve these stones and put them in place, and these 13,000 years of time were essential in order to do this kind of geomancy on a global level. Also, a new kind of grid could be formed around the external, in space around the earth, so that we can make a transformation at this time, right now, today. If you go back 110 years ago to the beginning of the 20th century, at that time they believed there were approximately 30 million species on Earth. Now it took somewhere between 4.6 to 5 billion years, depending on who you talk to, for those 30 million species to develop and to be living on the surface of the Earth at this time. But in those 110 years, because of this level of consciousness that we are in now, we have killed these things. We are now down to approximately 15 million species on Earth. It depends on who you talk to. Everybody